Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. On Mondays, especially, I like to tell you how I came up with the topic or theme of that week's Pastor Gary Live episodes. So I guess I'll have to tell you that this week I went to bed searching for a topic to explore with you, and then in the morning, as I awoke in a dark room, I get up pretty early, my eyes opened and I suddenly thought, lamps. I began to think of some of the times when lamps are mentioned in the Bible or play an important role in the Bible's story, and I knew I had my topic. In particular today, I wanted to start with the Old Testament story of Gideon. I'm usually surprised that Gideon is not more well known than he is. His story is found in the book of Judges, and there's a lot of us in this story. One of the first things we see in his story tells of Gideon going to a local shrine to Baal at night and pulling down the statue of Baal that was there. It was a courageous thing to do. Later, when he's leading the army, he isn't sure if he's supposed to go into battle, and so he casts a fleece to test God, saying that if the ground is wet with dew but the fleece is dry, then God intends him to go to war. Sure enough, the next morning, that's how it is. But that's not enough for Gideon. He wants to be sure, and so he does it again, this time asking for the ground to be dry and the fleece to be soaking wet. Well, it was, and Gideon had his answer. All this is a bit surprising considering how we meet Gideon in the Bible story. When he first comes on the scene and God sends an angel to tell him that God would deliver the people from oppression by the Midianites through him, Gideon wasn't a bold warrior at all. Instead, the angel found him threshing his grain in a wine press. Now, normally, threshing grain was done in an open place so that the wind could blow the chaff away. But you see, Israel had been conquered by the neighboring nation of Midian, and if Midian's soldiers saw Gideon threshing grain, they would come and take their share of it. But hidden down in the winepress, Gideon couldn't be seen. In essence, he's hiding and avoiding paying taxes. Gideon did take on the role of a deliverer, however, and sent word out to raise an army to go against the Midianites, and the people assembled. God looked down and told Gideon, "Your army is too big. If you go to war with this army, you will think you saved yourselves and that I didn't do it. Send everyone who is afraid home." So Gideon made the offer for people to leave, and 22,000 did, leaving Gideon with 10,000 soldiers. Then God told him there were still too many, and sent everyone to the river to get a drink. Those who knelt and scooped up water to drink were sent home, and those who lapped water directly from the river got to stay. Now, Gideon was left with 300 soldiers to go up against the whole army of Midian. The army of Midian was encamped in a valley surrounded by mountains and hills. So that night Gideon stationed his men on all the hills all the way around the camp, each with a trumpet and a torch hidden under a jar so the light wouldn't be seen. At last we come to the lamps. When they were all in place, Gideon blew his trumpet and smashed the jar, which was a signal for everyone else to do that too. Down in the Midianite camp, they suddenly saw and heard from 300 lights and trumpets, and they thought that each one represented a whole company of soldiers surrounding them and in the midst of attack. It threw them all into confusion, and they attacked each other, and those who could fled all the way back to Midian. Meanwhile, Gideon's soldiers stood still and watched as God won this battle for them. Oh, I forgot to mention that when they blew their trumpets and smashed the jars so that the light would shine out, they also shouted, "For the Lord and for Gideon." And maybe that was the first sprouting of what happened later to Gideon. You see, while Gideon is a great hero and faithful here, it seems like they should have shouted, "For the Lord," and left it at that. Adding, "and for Gideon," detracts and takes away from giving credit for the victory to God. And after this, as the story goes on and on, following other adventures of Gideon, in each one there's more and more about Gideon and less about God. By the end of the story, it's all about Gideon and hardly at all about God. And Gideon's sons, who rule after him, are so bad, the people have to take steps to get rid of them. So maybe Gideon's lamp helps us see ourselves more clearly. Sometimes we are boldly faithful, following God and God's plan for us. And then other times, perhaps we let too much of ourselves get in the way of our faith. May our prayer be that in the battles of life, we live by the light of God, shouting, "For the Lord." Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.